If you think you know what loyalty means inside a marriage, wait until you hear what happened to me. Stay until the end. You won't believe how far one person will go to use your own life against you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. I kept my eyes on the menu longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't know what I wanted. I'd eaten at that steakhouse a dozen times. But because Lauren was still talking, and I needed a second to make sure I'd actually heard her right. She sat across from me in a burgundy blouse, hands folded on the table like she was presenting a quarterly report. The restaurant was quiet, low lighting, a couple laughing 2 tables over. Everything normal except for the fact that my wife had just told me she was pregnant by another man. His name was Tyler. She'd met him on a girls' weekend to Savannah 4 months ago. She said it clearly, no tremor in her voice, no downward glance, just fact delivery, the kind of calm that takes rehearsal. While you're listening, share in the comments which country you're watching from. And let's continue. I set the menu down. And you're telling me this here, tonight, at dinner. She said we didn't have to blow up our lives over it. She said I was stable, reliable, good with money, her words, and that a child needed that kind of foundation. She said we could stay married, raise the baby together, and keep everything intact. I remember thinking, she's not asking. She's offering me a deal. Then came the clause. If I chose divorce instead, she'd be entitled to half the house, half the savings, half the business, and the rental property on Decatur Street. She said she had spoken to someone, she didn't name who, and that her position was solid. She said it the way people say things they've been coached to say. I called the waiter over, paid the check in cash, and stood up. She said we should finish eating and talk it through. I told her I'd heard everything I needed to hear. I buttoned my jacket, walked past the hostess stand, and pushed out into the night air. My hands were steady, my jaw was tight, and somewhere between the parking lot and my car door, I made a decision that had nothing to do with emotion. She was not going to use my life as a safety net for someone else's mess. Ryan opened his condo door, still wearing his work shirt, collar loose, a glass of water in his hand. He took one look at my face and stepped aside without saying a word. I sat down at his kitchen table and laid it out. All of it. The restaurant, the pregnancy, Tyler, the rehearsed tone, the property threat at the end. Ryan listened without interrupting, which was his way. He was 41, a year younger than me, and he'd spent 15 years handling real estate law and ugly family disputes. He'd seen people behave badly with money on the line. He knew what calculated looked like. When I finished, he set his glass down and said, "That didn't sound like a woman in crisis. That sounded like a woman reading from a script." I asked what he meant. He said the order mattered. Confession first, then sympathy play, then the financial warning. That wasn't panic. That was a sequence. He told me to stop treating it like a marriage problem and start treating it like a legal one. He said to think about what she might have already done before that dinner, what she might have copied, moved, or documented. He gave me his guest room for the night. I didn't argue. Before I turned in, he said one more thing. Whatever Lauren had planned, it probably went further back than Savannah, and it probably went further than what she'd told me. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, but sleep wasn't coming. So I got up, thanked Ryan, and drove home. I wasn't grieving. I was backtracking, counting months, remembering trips, remembering the weekend she came home from Savannah quieter than usual, and said she was just tired. She hadn't been tired. I pulled into my own driveway after midnight. Lauren's car was gone. I walked inside and the house had that particular silence that comes after someone has moved through it in a hurry. Half her closet was cleared. Not everything, just enough. A surgical departure. Her laptop was still on the dresser, lid open, screen dim but not locked. I don't know why she left it. Maybe she was coming back for it. Maybe she didn't think I'd look. I looked. Her messages with Tyler were still synced to the desktop app. I scrolled back and read them slowly. Tyler was maybe 38 based on one reference to his college graduation year. In one thread, he called me predictable. He wrote that men like me always chose comfort over confrontation, that I'd absorb the situation rather than fight it. He wasn't angry when he wrote it. He was casual, like he was describing a car that wouldn't start. Lauren had replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "That's exactly what I'm counting on." Further back, I found the timeline. She had mapped out the pregnancy talk weeks in advance. She'd noted the dinner location, the financial structure, even the phrasing around the rental property. There were screenshots of my business registration and a photo, taken from inside our bedroom, of my safe. She had copied bank statements going back 11 months. I closed the laptop, plugged in my phone, and took pictures of every relevant screen. Then I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water I didn't drink, and stood there with the kind of clarity that only comes when you finally understand exactly what's been done to you. I texted Ryan one line: "You were right. It goes further." 2 days later, Lauren texted and asked to meet near my office. She picked a cafe on Ponce, neutral ground, public but quiet. Her tone in the message was softer than the restaurant. She wrote that she wanted to talk things through, that she hadn't meant to come across so hard. Reading it, I got the sense she thought I'd spent 2 days panicking and was ready to negotiate. I showed up early. I ordered coffee. I set my second phone, screen off, on the table next to my jacket, already recording. Lauren came in looking composed but careful. She asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. She slid into the seat across from me and started talking about the baby, about stability, about how this didn't have to get ugly. I let her finish. Then I pulled out my phone and set Tyler's messages on the table in front of her. Her face changed the way a card table collapses, all at once. She reached for the phone, then stopped herself. She said it was out of context. She said Tyler had a way of exaggerating things. She said it wasn't what it looked like. I told her I also had the photo of my safe, the copied bank statements, and the timeline she and Tyler had written out together. I said it calmly because there was no reason to raise my voice. She went quiet for a few seconds. Then she said she'd structured the dinner that way because she knew I'd choose stability over confrontation, and that a child still needed a stable father figure, like that argument still had somewhere to land. I told her Tyler already had that job, whether he wanted it or not. When I stood up and picked up my jacket, she looked different than she had at the steakhouse. She wasn't reading from a script anymore. She was improvising, and she wasn't good at it. The next afternoon, Brandon Mercer called me. Brandon was 47, a contractor I'd worked with for nearly a decade on the rental property and 2 commercial projects. He was careful with his words, slow to call unless he had a reason. He said he'd heard something and thought I should know. Natalie Bennett, Lauren's closest friend, a woman of about 40 who I'd always found a little too opinionated for social situations, had been talking. According to Brandon, Natalie was telling people in our shared business circle that I had a drinking problem, that I could get aggressive at home, and that Lauren had left for her own safety. I sat with that for a moment. I wasn't surprised. I was cold. Brandon said he didn't believe it. He said he'd worked closely with me for years across 3 projects and had never once seen anything that matched that story. But he warned me the version was spreading, and some people didn't know me well enough to push back. I drove to Natalie's house that evening. She answered the door looking caught. I didn't yell. I told her I had recorded conversations, timestamped messages, and a documented financial scheme. I told her that in a courtroom, every story gets tested against evidence, and that every date, every conversation, every lie Lauren had told would be part of the public record. I said I hoped she was comfortable with her name being attached to what she'd been repeating. She didn't say much after that. That night, I made calls. Steady, professional calls to clients, to suppliers, to 2 men who sat on a local business board with me. I wasn't dramatic about it. I just made sure the real version of events was in the room before Lauren's fiction finished spreading. By the time I went to sleep, I felt like I'd built a small wall around the things that mattered. Victor Prescott didn't have a warm office. No family photos, no motivational art, just case files, a clean desk, and a window that faced a parking structure. He was 55, gray at the temples, and he handled family law and contested property cases. Ryan had referred him. He said Victor didn't give speeches, he gave outcomes. I sat across from him and walked through everything in order. The dinner, Ryan's condo, the laptop, the cafe recording, the copied bank files, Natalie's smear campaign. Victor listened with a legal pad open and a pen he never put down. When I finished, he said Lauren had done something specific and serious. She'd tied the pregnancy announcement directly to a financial ultimatum. That wasn't a confused wife having a hard conversation. That was coercion with documented preparation behind it. He said the recording from the cafe was particularly useful because she'd repeated the pressure on record. A week into the process, Lauren's attorney reached out with an offer. She would drop most of the property claims if I signed a confidentiality agreement and agreed not to discuss the specifics of her conduct publicly or in depositions. She wanted the whole thing buried quietly. Victor laid the offer on the table and looked at me. I told him no. I wanted an open ruling from a judge. I wasn't interested in a private exit that let Lauren walk away with her version of events intact. If the record was going to exist, I wanted it to reflect what actually happened. Victor nodded like he'd expected that answer. A few days later, Ryan mentioned something he'd picked up through mutual contacts. Tyler, the man Lauren had built this entire plan around, had gone quiet. Once court dates were scheduled, once the word paternity and child support entered the picture, Tyler had stopped responding to Lauren's messages. The man who called me predictable had apparently found something more important to do than be a father. Lauren was now carrying a child alone and losing a legal fight she thought she'd already won. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. It rarely is when the evidence does the talking. The judge was a woman close to 60, sharp-eyed and efficient. She ran a clean proceeding. She didn't tolerate detours, and Lauren's attorney tried a few. Victor presented the timeline first, the laptop messages, the financial prep, the photographs of the safe. Then he played the cafe recording. The room was quiet while Lauren's own voice described how she expected me to choose stability over confrontation, how she'd structured the dinner conversation to maximize the pressure. The judge asked Lauren's attorney a direct question about the child's paternity. Lauren, who had kept her composure through most of the morning, confirmed on the record that the child was not mine, that she had used the threat of divorce costs to pressure me into accepting a situation I had no hand in creating. My business had been established and registered 3 years before the marriage. The house, the Decatur Street rental property, and the core accounts had all been acquired or funded with assets from before we met. I had kept everything legally separate throughout the marriage, something I had, luckily, maintained in paperwork without ever expecting to need it. The judge reviewed the documentation and left the house, the business, the rental, and the core accounts under my name. Lauren's financial claims were reduced significantly, not to nothing, but to a fraction of what she'd threatened over that dinner table. Lauren sat at her table with a face I didn't spend much time reading. Her attorney leaned in and said something quietly. She nodded once. Outside the courthouse, Ryan shook my hand. Victor said we'd done everything right. I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt like a man who'd done a job that needed doing. In the weeks after, the loose ends settled themselves. Tyler never appeared in any official capacity. Brandon Mercer told me Natalie had gone quiet, that once he confirmed my account directly to 2 people in our circle, the story she'd been spreading lost its legs. Nobody likes backing a narrative that gets publicly dismantled. Months later, I heard through Ryan that Lauren had the baby. Tyler wasn't around. She was managing on her own, which was the situation she'd tried so hard to engineer me into funding. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel much at all in that direction anymore. What I felt was the drive home on a Tuesday evening, windows down, radio low. My house, my name on the deed, my account, my business still standing. The life I'd built before her was still there. She hadn't taken it apart. She'd tried, and she had failed, because the moment she sat across from me at that steakhouse and started reading from a script, she'd made one serious mistake. She thought I was the kind of man who would fold. Was I right to refuse her deal and take it all the way to court, or would you have handled it differently? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story hit, like it and subscribe.